we're thinking very much about giving as we come to this passage with the lady with her gift. And some people are very generous when it comes to giving money to the church, sacrificial even. Other people less so. I was a church treasurer for a while, and it's enlightening and interesting and humbling, frankly, to see how sacrificially some people give. These few verses that we're looking at in front of us, verses 41 to 44 in particular, are about you giving to the church, to the Lord's work specifically. But this isn't about raising funds. This isn't we need to raise money for the church roof or anything like that. It's much more important even than raising funds, because what we're going to see in these verses is that your attitude to giving actually reflects your own heart, your own desire, your affections for the Lord. And that's really important. That's more important than raising money. So if you understand these verses correctly, by the end of it, you shouldn't be on a kind of guilt trip and kind of, oh, right, I need to start giving more money to the church. That's not what we're about. That's absolutely not what we're about. What we want to have from this passage really is that your whole thinking about giving would actually be reshaped and redirected and become really wholesome and good. Because if you think to give to God is to lose something, then there's a whole raft of things that you need to grasp. We're really missing the point if we think that you're losing by giving to God. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our way through this our thinking with a series of questions. And the first question is really simple. How much did this woman give? And it might seem really obvious. So verse 41, Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. 2 small coins, hardly worth anything. The language just gives you this impression of really it's hardly worth bothering with. When our boys were little, they used to like those things outside charity shops. You know, the one where you kind of put a 2p in and it rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and it drops in the middle. They used to love them. Dad, can I have some money? And you'd kind of get the copper coins out, you know, just kind of 50s don't roll, lads, so I'll give you a 2 pence, you know, all that kind of thing. And you'd go for the lowest, you know, literally the copper coins. But this woman isn't doing that. When she's dropping in 2 copper coins, she's not doing what cheapskates like me did. So verse 43, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. So she's not kind of rummaging around in the bottom of her handbag and finding out a few copper coins. This is a pitifully poor woman, and she's dropping in everything she has to live on. She's got nothing in reserve. There's no surplus. There's no backup. This is it. All she's got to live on, and she drops it in. And that's astonishing. Perhaps even more astonishing is the fact that she had 2 coins, and she could have kept one. That would have seemed a reasonable thing to do, wouldn't it? You know, just keep one and just put the other one in, because, you know, you've got to eat. She puts them both in. It is that remarkable. Even the computer's surprised. For what, though? You know, who gains? It's such a pathetic gift. Who could possibly gain from these 2 nothing coins going in? All that's happening here is she's getting poorer. She can't even eat now. What's the point? What's the gain in that? And sometimes you hear people say, you know, the church are only after your money. You know, you do hear that kind of thing said quite a lot. And the truth is, often that's true. There are money-making thieves that will use religion to take your money. Charlatans. And, you know, what actually happens is they give themselves a nice lifestyle. And they'll promise you give this money, dial this number with your credit card, give $100, £100, and you will receive blessing in return. And if you don't, it's because you didn't have enough faith. So try again. Give us some more money, and they're just robbing you. Not this woman, though. No one's twisting this woman's arm. She's just going up to the box on her own, unseen, as she thinks, and she's just dropped her money in. Who's gaining? It's not. There's no one actually gaining financially, really, because it's such a small amount of money. And you go back to the verses that we read, verse 38. Jesus also taught, beware of these teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and receive greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head table at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows, notice, widows, out of their property, and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be severely punished. Jesus is scathing about any kind of church leader that's trying to fleece this woman for financial gain. So no, in terms of the church is only after your money, Jesus is as scathing of that mentality of anybody only being after your money as anything else. But Jesus thinks that this woman has done something good, something really good. But his eyes aren't towards the benefit of the religious people or the temple or any of those things. Because, the reality is, it's just two small copper coins. It's buttons. This isn't going to pay for anything. Other people are giving in loads more money, and that would have had a real impact. These 2 coins, it's less than a rounding error in some scribe's book, So who benefits from this enormous sacrifice? Well, firstly, she does. This is good for her. When we understand something of why anybody would give the way that she did, then you'll understand why it's such a blessing to her. And obviously something for yourself. So secondly, she benefited, but secondly, you benefit. In fact, millions of others have benefited ever since. Anybody who's ever grasped this story, when you understand why anybody would give like that, then you begin to share something of her heart, her attitude, and you are blessed. So who benefits from these 2 tiny copper coins that are worth nothing? She did, and you do. Here we are, all these years later. We're going to come back to her in a little while. Next question. Why didn't Jesus stop her? Why didn't he stop her? She's a widow. She's got no widow's pension. There's no universal credit. There's no one to provide for her. All she had was these 2 small coins, and she drops them in the box. And it seemed like the most natural thing in the world, didn't it, to go up, for Jesus actually to jump up and say, no, stop, wait. God cares for you so much. He loves you. It's more important that you keep this money and have something to eat. Go and look after yourself. But he doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. He knows better than that, because he can see that this is her worship of God tangibly expressed. It's a very Christian, Christians have our own language often, don't we? We use a lot of phrases. So very often you hear Christians say, I gave my heart to Jesus. I gave my heart to Jesus. Not even particularly biblical phrase. And if you've never heard a Christian say that, you will, because Christians do say that kind of thing quite often. So I gave my heart to Jesus. But did you give your bank account to him? Did you give your car, your home? Have you given your time? Have you given your career to him? Have you given your retirement to him? When she gave those 2 coins, she gave everything she had. There's nothing that she had that she would not give to God. That's astonishing. Her gift is her worship. It's a statement that says, I'm entirely yours, and I'm entirely dependent on you. And so it'd be really crass for anybody then to step in and say, no, don't do that. You keep that money for yourself. She's saying, look, this is my worship. I'm giving everything to the Lord. For anyone then to jump in and say, no, stop. It's crass. It's insensitive. A second reason not to stop her actually comes from trusting God and taking God at his word. And God's stated love and care for widows specifically. Psalm 68 describes God as father to the fatherless, defender of widows. Deuteronomy 10, he ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. God cares for those who are more vulnerable in society. And again, with no widow's pension, no universal credit, no help, no support, the Lord himself cares for those who are most vulnerable. He cares for widows and orphans and foreigners, and he commands care for them in the law because he cares. The law reflects his own care for them. Acts chapter 7, the institution of the first deacons in the church. What was that about? Well, it was actually to improve the care for widows. There was a problem coming up, and it was about looking after widows. Very practical care. If Jesus had stopped that widow, it would have been to display a lack of faith in the promises of God to her as a widow. She is trusting God to the future. Why should he stop that? She's trusting in God's word to take care of her. A third reason not to stop her is simply this. Jesus sees all of this as a real key teaching moment. Now, several times in Mark's Gospel, we've seen Jesus actually gather his disciples together. Something's come up, a bit of a disagreement. Who's the greatest? All this. Stop what you're doing. Everybody stop. This is a teaching moment. You need to come to me and listen. And it's interesting that he's doing it here. Verse 43 starts, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, look, you need to see this, lads. You need to listen to this. Because what we've just seen here is really important. And it's not about the money. It's not, you need to give more. Hardly that, is it? Because it's not about the value. So we're going to think in a minute about your own giving to the Lord and how you think it through. But it's helpful just to think about the thought process we go through when we give. So we're going to think about how you plan to give at Christmas. And no sense of guilt trip, just to think about how you think about giving. How do we decide what we're going to give to people? Because as you think about what you're going to give at Christmas, it helps us think through what it feels like to give and why we give and how we choose what we give. So I don't know if you've started your present buying or you've not started. Mine's well underway. Most people have a list. It might be written down. It might just be in your head, however it works. But you think through, don't you, who you're going to buy things for. You're going to buy things for family. You're going to buy things for friends. You might buy things for your neighbours or teachers or the postman or the bin man or whatever it may be. And for everyone, you're going to then decide how much you're going to spend. How do you decide then? How are you going to decide what you're going to buy? How much you're going to spend? Well, it's how well do you know them? I can tell you now, the presents I buy for Julie will be very different from what we might give to the bin man. Yeah? That relates to how close I am to each of those people. Because it does, doesn't it? So we're thinking about how we decide what we give. You might say, well, how are you trying to decide? Are you obligated to maybe spend a little bit more or a little bit less this year after what they got you last year? It's kind of, well, I didn't get them anything. I don't know, I need to get, what am I going to get them? I gave them a tin of biscuits and they bought me a car. What am I going to do now? So there's a sense of obligation and debt. Obviously, there's what can I afford? What surplus cash have I got after I've paid all the bills and after I've sorted out a few treats for myself? What money have I got left over to actually buy presents with anyway? And we all do that, and it's obvious. So what you see in that is that there are two elements to giving. It's relational, how you think about the person, and it's economic. How much can you afford to give? And the stronger the relational bond, the more you're likely to spend. That's not always the case, of course. Sometimes you just find that one thing, and it might only be £2 from a charity shop, but you know it, you've nailed it. So there'll always be exceptions. But in general, we tend to spend more on those that we have a closer relational bond to. So Jesus then sat that day watching people give to the temple, put their money in these sort of temple chests that were laid out in the courtyard there. And he saw people put in really handsome amounts, kind of quite impressive amounts going into the church. They're pretty good. How did they decide how much to give as they put in their money in the temple? Very much it would be how we decide to give at Christmas. Your money is your own to divvy up. And you decide what comes first, what bills have to be paid, what can wait, and you decide what's most important to you, and you divvy your money that way. So you weigh up your relationships and your economics, and you give accordingly, and you keep some for treats. That's how they were giving. That's how the people were giving at the temple, but it's not how she gave. That's the thing. So what drove her to think differently and to act differently? Well, we're getting there. We're absolutely getting there. So, final question. You personally, how do you decide what to give to the Lord? Not Christmas presents. How do you decide what you're going to give to the Lord? And I'm going to suggest that there are 4 motivations, 4 different things, 4 different ways in which people give. And it's likely that how you give is motivated by one, or maybe a blend of 1 or 2 of these things. And the widow's motivation is the last of the 4 that we'll come to. So firstly, it might simply be that you've never actually really thought about it. Our normal practice, outside, in the old normal as opposed to the new normal, you would have a bag would go around, and that would take an offering during the service. And quite a few people give by monthly standing order, and people do it in different ways. So not everybody's going to put something into the bag as it comes round. We do that morning and evening, of course, because some people only come to one, choose the half blessing of one service rather than 2. But you know that we've got to pay for heating and lights, but you're not really giving that much more thought to it. So it's all a bit awkward, when the bag comes around. It's kind of, have we got any money? And so you never really think about it. You get some change, maybe put a £5 in or whatever it is. And it's a bit like the collection at the end of a funeral service for somebody that you don't really know. It just feels a bit awkward sometimes. But if you're anything like that, if you've never really thought it through in any sort of meaningful way, you need to remember again how seriously Jesus dealt with this. He called his disciples to him and said, you need to get this. You need to give it some thought. It mattered to Jesus. And if giving to his work is something you never really thought through, you need to. So secondly, you may be somebody who gives more practically. You know that you need to give money to the church for the church to function, because it's a blessing to you, and it's a two-way thing. You probably know my salary comes entirely from the gifts of everybody at the church. There's no government or anybody giving any extra money. We're not part of a big denomination or anything like that. Not that they work that way either, typically. So you know that if you want to have a pastor here, you need to contribute. You know that the church gives to mission. That's very important, and obviously new windows, heating, maintenance over time, and none of that stuff's cheap. And so obviously if we're going to have a church and we want a pastor, then we're going to need to pay for it. And how much you choose will then be based on how much you think you can afford and what the needs of the church are. You kind of budget it all out, and your money's your own, and you're going to make sure that you can keep all your commitments and see what's left after that. But think of those Christmas presents. Those Christmas present decisions are based on economic and relational grounds, aren't they? So we ought not to base our giving to God's work on just economics. How much does the church need to run? There needs to be a relational element too, not a relational element to me. I'm just the employee. A relation to God himself. So our third motivation, then, is more relational. And so many people give on the grounds of received grace from God, recognizing his great love and grace to you. God loved the world so much that he gave, what did he give? Legions of angels? World peace? He gave his Son, his only begotten Son, so that whoever believes on him shall not perish but have eternal life. That's what God has given you. He gave up his Son to death so that you might receive eternal life. That's astonishing, generous, lavish, open-handed love and grace to people like you and me who just don't deserve it. You've been saved from hell and death, from the punishment of sin that you do deserve. And you've been saved to an eternity of bliss, adopted by God himself. He gave his only begotten Son that you might become an adopted child. It's astonishing. And you've done nothing to earn that. It's a gift from God to you, and it's a gift that will keep on giving for all eternity. What a blessing. And if your giving then to him is based on the riches of glory that God has given to you, then goodness, that's beautiful, isn't it? Just an astonishing response to his grace to you. But there is a hidden danger in that. We need to be really clear and careful. It is good to respond to God's grace. And in fact, it would be really easy for me to preach that, to say that after all, everything God has done for you, would you not just then give something back to him? But you're not in debt to him. He's not in debt to you. He has given you things in grace. It's not that he has done this, so you must do that. He did that in grace, with no expectation of return from you. You can't pay back. So even good works, even generous giving, can actually feel like that obligated response. You know, I only gave him a tin of biscuits and they gave me a car. He's given me so much, I need to give more back. It's obligation. Sure, that's not quite the positive giving that it kind of ought to be. That's not necessarily how everybody will feel, but there is that danger within it. You can't repay him. You're not required to repay him. So you come to the final, fourth motivation, how that poor woman gave. When Julia and I got married, we exchanged wedding rings. But we didn't give a ring to each other in any kind of obligation. You know, Julie's giving me a wedding ring, I suppose I better get her one. You know, it's rubbish, isn't it? And in fact, it wasn't even primarily a thanksgiving for our relationship up to that point. You know, I give thee this ring, so far so good. That's not exactly the warmest either, is it? We exchange rings as a token of love, as a commitment to the future. We belong to each other. It's a token of our love for the future. We expect things from one another. We will give to one another. We will be one in the future. That's what giving is about. It's an expectation of giving and receiving committed love till death do us part. When you give to the Lord, it's good to respond to the grace he has already given, but you're actually anticipating future grace from him. You're his and he is yours. It's a statement about your commitment and trust. You remember, in giving anything to him, you remember that everything you have is already his anyway. He's not richer for your giving, and you're not poorer, because it's already his. When you give, you're trusting him to provide for your needs as he has said he would. You're putting faith in his future grace towards you. Your wants and desires are to see his work prosper, his name honored, his name made known. So to give to the Lord is to kind of renounce the trinkets of low-value things on earth for the permanent, untouchable treasures in heaven. To give to the Lord is to anticipate the future grace of the God who has bound himself to you in covenant love. It's a statement about the future, which obviously means more than just money. Everything here is about these 2 copper coins and this woman, but she's giving everything. The context is just a few verses back. Jesus has said, look, the number one thing, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, with your everything, with everything that you are. Love the Lord your God. That's your money. That's your time. If you only give out of your surplus, whatever's left, and you keep the rest for yourself, can you really say that you're doing that? A really simple thing. I mentioned it briefly earlier. We've got 2 copper coins. We have 2 services on a Sunday. 2 hours out of your time. Well, I'll give him 1 hour, but I'm busy in the other. To what extent do these things really impact us and take over? No, I'm the Lord's, and he's given me this whole day. I want to spend it with him and with his people. Do you only give out of your surplus and keep stuff for yourself? Giving is an act of worship. It's a statement of commitment, of faith, of trust in him. It's a living relational thing. You're not trying to put God into debt. I've given him all this stuff. I'm expecting big stuff back. No. You know that he is already going to lavish this stuff on you because he's a God of grace. You know that future grace is coming because of a relationship that he has put you into. So it's kind of, well, I've got nothing that's of any value to me compared with what he is going to give me. So I'll put it to the Lord's work and bring him glory and honor. That's what's in this woman's heart and mind as she puts her 2 copper coins in. She knows that he will bless her. She's not putting him in debt towards it because he's already made the promises to bless. When you see it like that, it's easy. It's easy to give. Which means, for all of these reasons, when you give your time and your money to the Lord, you don't lose, you gain. This is gain for you in your own walk with him. What riches we have in Christ. Tremendous stuff. We'll leave it there. We're going to have our second hymn. All I Once Held Dear. What a great place to finish. So, again, no singing in the building, of course, but for those at home, please do sing away. All I Once Held Dear.